Alrighty, guys, here we go. You are about to create your very first iOS app in Swift 4. Now, what are we going to create? Well, we're going to create something seemingly very simple, but it's a gateway to show you all of the things that you need to know when it comes to structuring an app and what all the various bits and pieces of files and storyboards and graphical designers do. So, what are we making? Well, I used to do astronomy a long time ago, and in order to look at the stars at night, your eyes needed to adjust to the dark. And that was a problem because sometimes you needed to look at a map or a star chart. So, the way we got around that was to cover a torch with some red, sort of almost translucent paper in order to make the color of the light red. And when red light shines into your eyes, it allows you to keep that dark adaptation. So what we're going to do is we're going to create one of these astronomy torches using just the screen of our device. So we're going to allow our screen to be the color red. And then we're also going to do some funky stuff around that involving interaction with tapping the screen. So along the way, you're going to learn a whole bunch of stuff. And it's all really quite important stuff. And it's stuff you'll be doing over and over again when you create apps. First of all, we'll look at storyboards, and this is where we kind of design most of the graphical look of our app. We will, of course, be looking at the graphical elements that we drag into our storyboards and how they work. We'll look at how to connect code to graphics that we've shoved into our storyboard. We'll look at how to respond to button clicks, how to constrain all of the things in our screen, because as you can imagine, an iPad is a different size to an iPhone. So iOS, or rather Xcode, needs a way to know how to place the various items inside your app so that they don't look out of place on different screen sizes. And it's quite elegant how they've done that. Then, I'm going to give you a little bit of homework. It's not too difficult, but it gets you thinking, and thinking is the root of all solutions in app creation. But there's some good news. I'll give you a solution to go along with that homework. After, of course, you promise me that you'll try the homework first. Right? Let's begin. Hello again. The very first thing we need to know about in iOS development is a concept called storyboards. And storyboards hold the graphical parts of our app. They allow us to design things in more or less a drag and drop way, which makes our lives much easier as developers. So open up Xcode and let's see what storyboards are all about. So open up your Xcode beta or your Xcode 9 if you're watching this once it's out of beta, and you are presented with this screen. And in this screen, we want to take the second option, which is to create a new Xcode project. Alternatively, you can click File, New, and you can go down to Project. They do the same thing. Now, there's lots and lots of options. First of all, I want to draw your attention to the top. We have iOS, watchOS, tvOS, macOS, and cross-platform. We're going to do tvOS much later on. We might even do some watchOS. But for now, we are only going to do iOS, and we are going to select one of these options. A single view, a game, an augmented reality app, document-based app. There are tons of them to go around. Each of these has their own uses, and there are reasons why you would choose them or not. For now, let's choose a single view app as the simplest version. And let's give this a name. Astro Torch. You can call it anything that you like. Now, if you are a registered developer, you can add your developer account here if you so wish. And then down below, it will automatically populate your organization name and your organization identifier. Now, the reason that it does that is so that later on it can produce this bundle identifier just below that allows the App Store to identify your app uniquely. Then below that, we choose Swift or Objective-C. We definitely want Swift. And if we're going to use the inbuilt database in iOS, which is called Core Data, we would select this option. but we're not, so we can unselect it. So let's just fill in our organization identifier, and that will allow us to click next. You can put anything in there because we're not going to publish this app. Then we're going to create that solution, so save it somewhere. I'll pop this into my desktop. And once it's finished doing its thing, you are presented with what looks like a very complicated screen. There's a lot of stuff going on here. So let's help you out a bit there. I'm just going to full screen this. And the first thing I want to draw your attention to is this tree over on the left-hand side. We have this little blue icon and it says AstroTorch. And if I scroll down, I can get the folder of AstroTorch. I have some tests, UI tests, and products. We're not going to worry about any of these tests and whatnot. For now, I want you to see that this folder contains a bunch of code files and a bunch of storyboard files. And we're going to go and look at a storyboard in a second. But for now, if you click this very top icon, the blue one, that sort of contains all the properties of your project. So if your project needs some external dependencies, or you need to specify what kind of target you want to deploy to, which version of iOS that means, then you can do that here. So we're going to leave all of that stuff alone for now. We're going to leave it as it stands. The first thing we're going to do is look at what Xcode thinks a single view app consists of. Now, where do we do this? Well, all of the graphical interfaces are, generally speaking, they're stored inside of storyboards. And if you look over on the left side in our tree view, we have two of them, a main storyboard and a launch screen storyboard. Launch screen is the screen that shows when your app launches. We're not going to touch that yet. We'll come to that much later on. For now, we're going to look at the main storyboard, which is shown when your app is loaded up on the device. And if you click it, it shows you this blank box called a view controller, because it controls the view. Now, this little arrow on the left-hand side, inside the view controller screen, tells us that this is the first view that will be shown when this storyboard loads. Okay? Now, coming back to the files in this AstroTorch folder, all of these files contain the code that's going to run our app. So I'm just going to lightly touch on this so you have an idea. The app delegate.swift is how your app communicates with the iOS system. That's all you need to know about that. This view controller.swift is the code that corresponds to the view controller in our main storyboard. And if we click the view controller in the main storyboard, and over on the right-hand side, we select this middle icon, there's a little drop-down box under class that tells us view controller. So what Xcode is doing is it is connecting this view controller with this view controller code. Okay, so that's all that is doing. So let's bring up our main storyboard again, and let's just change one simple thing for our app. Let's change the background color of this view. So select the view, just click somewhere inside the box. And then, using these icons on the top right, if you hover over them, it tells you what they do. Let's show the attributes inspector. Now, the attributes allow you to change various properties of this view. And one of the most basic, of course, is background. So we can click Other, and then we can click over to red if we want to. So now the background of this view is red. Right, so that's simple. If you click anywhere away from the view, that right-hand pane disappears. So the right-hand pane contains a way of changing the properties and views of whatever you've got up. So now we want to run this. Let's run this on our simulator. All we have to do is come up to the top here if you're on full screen and show the AstroTorch and click the device menu, and you can select any device. So let's run this on an iPhone 5S. Now, when you click this play button, it tells you it's going to build and then run the current scheme. So it builds it, it's going to load it into the simulator, and there we have our app running in an iPhone 5S. And you can tell it's an iPhone because if you click the home button, back we go, and there we have our app, our Astro Torch. So we can click that, back in we go, we can double click it, and back out it goes. Now there's one final thing to know about this. If we go back to Xcode, if we come down to the bottom here and we click on this little tiny icon called Show the Debug Area, the bottom left. When you click that, this is going to give us messages from our app, which we don't have any at the moment, but that's going to be very, very useful. Okay, now that you know that, we can end this lecture, but just before we go, come up to the top, and to stop your app running in the simulator, click Stop. And that will stop it from running in the simulator and being connected to Xcode. It will still be available on the simulator, so you can still load it up if you want to. But it's no longer connected to Xcode. Right, let's move on to the next lecture and put some code behind this view controller. So far, you have created your very first app and you've run it on a simulator. However, you might be wondering, we haven't actually written any code yet. So let's do that. And here's just a little recap. So far, you've created a little red colored screen torch. Now we're going to add some code to do some fancy stuff in the background of this screen torch. So open up your Xcode project and follow along. Let's start with something nice and simple in terms of code. Let's open up our project, select the main storyboard, select the only view controller we have in there, and select the view. Now remember, if you select one of the top right icons to show the attributes inspector, we can change the background. Let's change this background back to its default, so it is white. Now we're going to change this background using a coding approach. And if you recall, I said this view controller is actually related to a code file. And we know that because if we go over to the right-hand side and we select the identity inspector, which is more or less the middle icon or the third one in, the class tells us this is view controller. And if you remember from your basic Swift, a class is a way of organizing some code or a blueprint to make an object. So we want to find this view controller. And luckily for us, over on the left in the tree view, we do have the view controller.swift. And when we click it, we're presented with a bit of code. We have an import at the top and a class. Now all an import does is make available to us all the various bits of code, methods and functions and classes that we need in order to program this part of our app. So don't worry about that for now. So the first thing I want you to see is that this class is called view controller and it is of type UI view controller. And the UI view controller is how we control the view in our user interface. See, I told you they made Swift very literal. So every screen that we load in our app, if it's a view controller, inherits from this class so that iOS knows what things to do at the right times. There's another thing down here. We have an override function, view did load. Now, don't worry about override for now. I want you to pay attention to this, view did load. This function will execute when the view did load or when it's finished loading. There's another function here, did receive memory warning. We don't have to worry about that for now, but you will later on. So we can simply remove it if we wish. We don't have to have that right now. Let's make this nice and simple. So in our view did load, we know that the view is loaded, it's on screen, it's in the memory of our app. So this view controller in the storyboard is loaded. Once it's done that, we know then that we can access the background of the view in order to change its color. And how do we do that? Well, self, and self simply refers to the instance of this class or the object we've made from this class. And then we can access the view. And notice this has a type of UI view, user interface view. Now that we have the view, we can put dot, we can access a background color. And then we can set that background color by using the UI color class. And inside of there, if we put a dot down, look at all the colors that pop up for us. So we want to have red. Now you can create any color that you can imagine in this class. You can use RGB values, hex values, whatever you can think of. So now that we've done that, let's save it by hitting Command S or heading up to File and Save. Once you've done that, make sure your simulator is checked on the correct iPhone and hit Play. Now once that loads up on our screen, we should see our AstroTorch get sent over. And once the view loads, it turns to red. There's a slight delay because it's the first time I've run this on this computer, so it gets a little bit laggy. But things could be worse. Android emulators are really laggy. I wouldn't recommend starting with those. Okay, so let's just recap that. In our storyboard, we have a view. That view is embedded inside of a view controller because we need something to control it. We've told Xcode that our file, view controller, or our class called view controller, is going to be responsible for that. So when our app loads, it loads up this view controller, it goes and grabs this view controller.swift and makes an object from it. And then once our view has finished loading, it sets the background color for us. So there you have it, your very first piece of code, and it was pretty easy, wasn't it? Okay, let's move on. In this section, we're going to learn how to use a button and how to wire up the code that sits behind that button. So in terms of our little torch app, we have a red screen. What if we wanted to change that screen to a blue color so we could use it at nighttime when we weren't so bothered about our night vision being interrupted? Well, let's see how we do that with a button. Open up your project and let's go. With our project open, select the main storyboard, and then over on the bottom right, drag this little window up just a little bit, and then click the circle with a square inside it, which will show the object library. And this is a library of all of the elements you can drop into your view. Down at the bottom of this, you have a filter. So if you start typing button, there we have it. And if you click the button, it tells you exactly what it does. Implements a button that intercepts touch events and sends an action message to a target object when it's tapped. Blah-de-blah-de-blah. We'll see what that means in real language in a minute. Now, if I click and drag this button, I can drop it somewhere in my interface. So I'm going to put it somewhere near the top left corner. Now, as with our view, if we deselect it, the right-hand pane disappears. If we select it again, we can now change the properties of the button by selecting the Attributes Inspector. And we have a very familiar interface. We can change the font if we want to. We can change the text color. So we can change this to red if we wished. But let's leave it as blue. We can change the shadow, the background, etc., etc. But more importantly, we can change what this button is called. So let's just call this Change Color and hit Enter once you've done it. And you'll notice over in your display, the button kind of gets truncated, so you can't see it properly. All you have to do is click one of these squares and drag it out. So now we have our button that says change color. That's fine by itself, but if we ran this, the button wouldn't actually do anything. So let's make it do something. And the logical place to put the code for that doing is inside the view controller file, just like everything else. But we're missing something. How do we actually connect the two? I mean, Xcode knows how they're connected, but we can't quite make that link yet. So click your storyboard, and Xcode actually provides a way for us to create this link right now. So I'm just going to drop out of full screen here so we can have this top bar available to us. And I'm going to make a little room here so we can see what we're doing. Now, the way you make a little room is you can switch off the left pane or the right pane by clicking these buttons in the very top right. So if I click the left one, that left bit goes away, and I can even drop the size of this view controller a bit, and I can make the right one go away if I so wished. Okay, now that they're all gone, we can click these two little rings in the top right, and it says show the assistant editor. Well, if you click that, it shows you the view controllers side by side with the associated code class. And that's useful because now we can do some drag and drop when it comes to our button. So we want to drag and drop a click event from our button. And the way we do that is by holding down Control, not Command, but the Control key. Click the button, and you'll see a little arrow come away from it, and drop it somewhere inside of the class, but outside of the function. And then it asks you what you want to do. Well, the very first thing that it wants to do is create what's called an outlet. An outlet is simply a variable, if you like, that refers to the button. That's no good because we want to click the button. So we want an action. And an action will hold a bit of code that we can execute when we click that button. We have to give this action a name. Let's call it button clicked. Type, don't worry about that for now. And then in event, look at all these different events we can access with iOS. Because remember, we're using a touch screen. It's not just a click. It could be a click and drag. It could be a click and hold. It could be anything like that. But the standard click event in iOS is called touch up inside, which sounds a bit wrong if you ask me, but hey-ho, they named it, not me. Touch up inside. And when you hit connect, our little action is implemented. So I'll just create a little room here. You'll notice there's a little brown, that's gray ground, come on. A little gray symbol, and when you hover over it, it shows you the button. So that's how we know that these two things are connected. Now, whenever you click the button, this bit of code will be executed. And what bit of code? Well, let's take this red color line, Command X to cut it, and drop it into this function. And let's line these things up so they look good. There we go. It's always good to have good lined up code. So now when we click the button, we should get the color red. So save that, come up to the top left, stop your old simulator, and hit play to load that again into the iPhone 5S. So there's quite a lot of signing that goes on and compiling and building and whatever we have here. There we have it. Just give it a second to load. Right. So you remember we removed that background color from our UI view and we made it default. Now that should have made it white if I recall correctly, but it didn't in this case. And this is something I've found quite often in development. The color's not quite what it should be. So that's just something for the future to look out for. But in the meantime, we have our blue button, and when we click it, we get our lovely red screen torch. So you have learned in the past 2 lectures, in less than 20 minutes, all the basics that you ever need. How to set up a view, the code that controls it, and how to provide interaction to connect the two. Isn't that great? So far, we've got a nice functioning app, but we're missing one key thing, and that's what happens when we change the size of our device. At the moment, we've just dropped a button in and we just put it at the top. But what if we put that button at the bottom right, and then we'd put it on a smaller screen device? Well, the button would actually disappear off of the screen. So to see that happening and learn how to account for that and fix the problem, let's open up our project and see how it's done. Right, the first thing we have to do is tidy up around here. Let's switch off our assistant editor by hitting the lined icon in the top right, and then switch back on our sidebars because we might actually need to use those. So now we have our standard editor view. Right, so element positioning. At the moment, we're looking at this view in terms of an iPhone 7s. And how do I know that? Or an iPhone 7 rather. The 7s isn't out yet. Because at the bottom of that view, it tells us view as iPhone 7. If I click that, it pops up different devices. So I can select different devices. I can get a 7 Plus, a 7, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. The important thing to know is that a 7 has a taller screen than a 5. So if I drop this change color down here and just put it right in the bottom corner there, or perhaps up a little bit, we'll put it there. What happens if we run that on our iPhone 5s, which has a shorter and narrower screen? Well, we get an error. That's nothing to do with the displacement, honest. Let's try that again, plus. Okay, so that's not working. You're probably going to hit an error as well. So what we do when that error comes up is we hit our home button on our simulator, we click and hold our AstroTorch, and we hit the X to delete it. Now let's see if we can load that up. There we go, that's loading. Okay, so we're loading our app, and we have no button. It has disappeared off screen because the iPhone 5s has a smaller screen than the 7. So obviously, let's stop that running, this is a problem. Now, if we want our UI to work consistently across all devices, we need a way of actually positioning this button. So how do we do it? Well, just below this screen, we have 4 tiny icons: Embed in Stack, Align, Add New Constraints, and Resolve Auto Layout Issues. Now, what you can do is you can click Resolve Auto Layout, and more or less that will do things automatically. But you're a developer. We don't do things automatically. We do things deliberately so that they are exactly as we planned. So don't really want to use auto layouts. What we want to do is click the second button in, which says Add New Constraints. And when you click that, if you have your button selected, it allows you to position the button from the edges of the screen on the current device that it's running on. So that's important, on the current device. So if I wanted to position this 10 screen points from the top and 10 from the left, you'll notice when I fill those values out, the button at the bottom says Add 2 Constraints. So I'll do that, add the 2 constraints, and our element will jump up to the top. If we click and drag the element, orange bars appear, and these orange bars are telling me that it's out of place at the moment, and it's telling me by how much. But there's a little orange outline where the button should be. So now if I run this on my iPhone 5s, I think you can guess what's going to happen. This is going to put it in the correct place, so it's always in the top left corner. And that means that every single device will display the button in the top left corner. Even if, what shall we do here? Let's go to Window, no, Hardware, there it is. we want to rotate our device left. It still displays it in the top left corner, which is excellent. We can rotate it back to right and it puts it back. So iOS does all of this handy stuff automatically for us. Of course, our button still works no matter the orientation of our screen. Right, so let's stop that running. Now, obviously, we don't just have two constraints. If we click the constraints icon, we can select it from the bottom, the side, and you'll notice this spaces it to the nearest neighbor. And that means if there's something next to it, it will constrain it perhaps to that item. So we can constrain various elements to other elements if we want to. We can also give them a fixed width, a fixed height. We can change their aspect ratio. Now, the one final thing is the next icon along, the little bars that say align. And when you click that, we can actually align this horizontally in the container. So that's going to center it if we put 0 in there. And it's going to center it if we put 0 in the vertically one. But in order to do that, we have to remove these constraints that already exist. So let's delete it. And select the orange icon and delete. Select the button. Select align horizontally and vertically. Add the two constraints and it pops it to the middle, directly in the middle of our screen. So if I move it, we get the same warning. You might have to click on and off twice there because I think this is a bug in the early Xcode. But anyway, it shows you that it's centered. And obviously, if we run that, that button will be centered. So that's very useful. If you had a login screen or something down here, you'd want to put it in the center of every device so you know it's displayed very prominently. So that is how we constrain items according to the size of the screen that your app is running on. So it's the moment you've all not been waiting for, your homework or your assignment. Now this is a little bit tough, but I'm going to give you some handy clues to get you through it. So far, our torch changes color once. It just changes to red. And you know how to do that now by changing the background color of the view. However, I want this to change to blue as well whenever we click the button again. And then when we click the button again, I want it to change back to red. So it's going to go red, blue, red, blue, red, blue. So your job is to change the code in the view controller class in order to achieve that. And here are some hints. Firstly, you need a Boolean variable to keep track of the screen color. Then you need to use an if-else comparison to check what the current color of the screen is. Finally, you'll have to flip the Boolean value every time the button is pressed. Now, this is a little bit tough, and if you're having trouble conceptualizing it, go back to my basic Swift 4 section and have a look at the variables section, because I explained Booleans, and have a look at the if-else comparison statements to understand what's happening there. I'll just give you one clue. I'll do that right now in Xcode. I'll show you how to set up the Boolean variable that you need. Right, here we are in the view controller. Now, our Boolean variable, I'm going to store at what we call the class level. That means it's one level into the class, so it's here. It's not inside any of these functions, but it's outside of them. And we're going to call this var screen is red. And we're going to set this equal to something, which is false, because when our app loads, the screen is not red, it's simply dark. Okay, so that's your clue. You can follow the rest of the clues, the if-else statements, and flipping that screen as red variable as your homework assignment. And I'll see you in the next lecture when I'll give you my solution. Welcome back. I hope you didn't struggle too much with that assignment. If you recall, we wanted to change our screen color from blue to red, blue to red, blue to red, and we needed some coding logic in order to do that. So let's have a look at my solution for that problem. Now, if you recall, I left you with one clue. Var screen red is screen is red is equal to false. And this is a Boolean, so it can only be true or false. Now, whenever we click our button, what we want to do is check what color the screen is. So, if the screen is red, then this value is going to be true. So, that looks like this. If screen is red. If that is true, then perform the following code. And if it's red, we want to turn it to blue. Self.view.background color is equal to UI color dot blue. Then, if our screen is not red, we can say else, and we can copy this line or cut it into here. Now, just a quick note, I did put this semicolon at the end. We don't actually need that. That's just one of my habits from when I'm typing C# or other programming languages. You don't have to have a line ending in Swift. So that's my bad. Sorry about that. Right, so this takes care of it. If the screen is red, we'll turn it to blue. Else, if it's not red, we'll turn it to red. But that Boolean of screen is red stays false the whole time, which is no good, because if it stays false, we will only ever use this part of our if-else. So at the end, we want to change screen is red. Now, we could do it in here. We could say screen is red is equal to false. And then here, screen is red is equal to true. And that's a perfectly valid way of doing it. But there's kind of a shortcut we can use for Booleans. So we can remove that. And down below the if-else statement, so completely outside of it, we can say screen is red is equal to, and then put exclamation mark, screen is red. And what this does is, I was a bit scared for a second there when I saw the error. I was like, huh? Have they changed something? But no, they haven't. It says make screen is red equal to the opposite value of screen is red. So if it's false, this little exclamation mark means it will make it true. So true will be written into here and vice versa. Right, so that should all work. Let's hit play and run it in the simulator. And hopefully we will have a lovely switching screen color. Here we go. I'm just going to rotate this. Whoops, I've pressed the wrong combination. If you hit Command L, it actually locks your screen. What I want to do was hit Command and arrow. There we go. So now if I hit change color, we'll get red, blue, red, blue. But you'll notice, of course, when it's blue, our button disappears because our button is also blue. So that's no good, is it? I think perhaps we should have a white colored button. So let's just do that. I wasn't planning on doing this, but I hate things being unfinished. Let's go to our storyboard, select our button, and over in the right, we could choose a white color. That means we can't see it now in our storyboard, but it will be visible inside of our app. There we go. So that looks pretty good. Change color, change color. Kind of looks like a police car. You could actually use this app to spoof your friends, couldn't you? If they're driving and you're in the back seat, just flash this so they think the police are flagging them down. I think that would be quite funny. I might do that to someone I know. Anyway, back to the subject at hand. That completes your very first iOS app. That was simple, wasn't it? Really, really simple. So in the next lecture, I'm going to summarize everything we've done so you can have a little recap. And once I finish that summary, I advise you to take a little break before you move on to the next section, just to let everything simmer down nicely. Congratulations, you've finished. You've created your very first app, a screen torch, and you've learnt all of the fundamentals. Let's just have a nice little recap so you understand what went on. First of all, we created a new project, and we looked at all the files that come within a project. We paid special attention to the storyboard and the viewcontroller.swift files. And we learnt how the storyboard views and view controllers actually link to viewcontroller.swift files or any other class in those files that we want to specify. Then, in order to create our fully functioning police screen torch that flicks from blue to red, we added some code to our view controller. We added a boolean, screen is red equal to false, and then we dragged in a button click event from our storyboard using the assistant editor. And then inside of that button click, which fires every time you click the button, we checked if the screen was red. And if it was, we turned it to blue. And vice versa, we turned it to red. And then we flipped the screen is red boolean. So in all of that, I hope you can see how we've connected a graphical part of our programming and the actual languagey part or the actual typing part of our programming. And that's a very important distinction for you to know as a programmer, that we always want to separate the different concerns inside of our app. Graphics over here, code over there. Now, the final thing that we looked at was constraints, or actually that was the second thing, but the final thing in my summary that we looked at. When we have an element in our storyboard, we want to constrain it because constraining it allows it to position itself relative to the size of screen of the particular device it's running on, because lots of devices have different size screens, maybe different pixel densities. So Apple has designed this constraint system so you have a consistent experience across all devices. Now, later on, as you become a more advanced developer, you'll make two versions of your UI, one for iPhone, one for iPad, because the screen estate real estate is different, so you can do that. But for now, this is a nice, handy, and fast way of getting started. Right, so well done for completing this once again. And once again, I say take a break once this is done. And whilst you're taking a break, here are some lovely fireworks to see you out.